do this properly. Excellent. Okay. Hello and welcome everybody to our Lockdown Still Lives Show and Tell Part 7. The subject this time is obstacles, and as I actually just mentioned, it's all about the obstacles we faced on our journey to the creatives and artists that we've become today. You know, and these can be physical obstacles like we've just faced trying to get everybody onto this call, to, you know, kind of just the support we lacked or needed at the right moment, the right advice, you know, or just kind of prejudices as well, isn't it? And perceptions. So it'll be really, really interesting to have a show and tell about the kind of obstacles we faced. And does anybody want to go first? Is there somebody first? Otherwise,
I'm quite happy to go first, although I don't. Get it out of the way.
No, Roger, that's fine. Excellent. I'm happy for somebody to go first. So I'll introduce Roger, and I look forward to hearing about your obstacles.
Okay. Okay, can we see that? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I wouldn't say that I come from a religious family, well, certainly nothing like Jeanette Winterton's in Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. But my backside has certainly graced quite a few pews in its time. I have a very early memory of sitting in a cold and gloomy chapel in Penclawes with my mother. And up there, high up there, incredibly high up there, was a minister. And he had plenty of oil, as they used to say. He was going at it. I don't know what about, because he was doing it in Welsh. But I do know, even at that age of 4, what absolute wasters he thought myself and the rest of the congregation were. When we moved from the countryside, chapel attendance became more frequent, with morning service and Sunday school every week. And another minister reprimanded me, this time in English, for my pride, my greed, my lust, my envy, my gluttony, my wrath, and my sloth, particularly my sloth. A clean living, hard-working, God-fearing life was relentlessly drilled into anyone unfortunate to have to listen. In Under Milkwood, Dylan Thomas references the tidy ones, those women who achieved the pinnacle of respectability with their pristine doorsteps and equally scrubbed morals, something the rest of us could only hopelessly aspire to. In this grand working-class Protestant dream, making art could only ever exist as a hobby, something to settle down and unwind to after a hard day of proper work. So there you have it. For as long as I can remember, I've felt something over my shoulder, someone over my shoulder. Maybe a minister, maybe God. Let's call him the man, keeping an eye on me for any signs of the 7 deadly sins. Quietly tutting should I choose to read a book or take a drink during the working hours of the day. Heaven forbid that I should make art when there was a lawn to mow or a fence to mend. As a result, I can only feel comfortable making art when all other pending tasks are in the out tray. The trouble being, of course, is that when I manage to reach that plateau of creation, I usually just feel fit to collapse in front of the television. Here is an unfinished painting from a long while back, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Mod. In it, I attempted to illustrate the confusion I felt then, and indeed now, over the demands of lifestyle choices, with hippie indulgence and psychedelia in the background vying with labour in a local industry for my teenage soul. But ultimately, here is Franz Schneider's Greyhound Catching a Young Wild Boar, a painting I immediately identified with when I saw it in a museum in Kent in Ghent, sorry. I could so relate to the fate of the poor boar. Having strayed from the track, he's having to be unceremoniously pulled back by the ear. For my final image, I've used a cartoon strip, which I came across on the internet. I haven't been able to discover the name of the actual author, but I do think that it illustrates the different perceptions of the artist in present-day society quite neatly.
Excellent. Very, very good. Yeah.
That's me done.
Excellent. That last section is brilliant. Yeah. Excellent. Anybody's got any comments?
Well, I can confirm that he has a little man sat on his shoulder, because whenever I want to do anything he thinks might not be quite the thing, I will say things like, is somebody pointing a gun at you? Will they shoot you if you do this? And I tease Roger, because it really is, I know it was funny, but it is a very painful thing, what things like religion can do to you in your upbringing.
Does it still affect your conscience then, Roger?
Sorry?
Does it still affect your conscience or your decision making?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you're always if you ever do anything slightly dodgy, I'm in a sweat. I need rehab after.
And I'm cheering you on.
Filling in a tax form. I mean, sort of.
Roger, what I find interesting. Oh, sorry, Sarah.
There's a lot of science behind guilt that says that guilt is one of the hardest things for them to unravel through, counselling and stuff. That guilt is just really hard for them to unpack.
Yeah, but serious guilt for something I haven't even done.
Yeah.
Roger, my question is, I come from a very Catholic background as well, so I know that kind of overarching power that can have over you. But you've overcome that, isn't it? So you did become an artist and you set off on that journey. So what actually gave you the strength and the belief, to kind of pursue that and to go against that, what can be an overbearing presence, isn't it? And it's still with you, but at least it's just a tiny man on the shoulder. It's not kind of that dog dragging you back into the
I think
that industry was.
I think the man's got a bit smaller. I'm bigger than him now, perhaps.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really positive
story,
I think.
Also, you hear about other people who've had sort of like, these sort of problems with coming from a religious background, and so that always helps you. Somebody else talk about it, and you think, yeah, I know. It's not just me.
Yeah, excellent, great. Yes, who wants to go next? Any takers? Julia, you're looking expectantly at the camera.
I was thinking about Roger and how he does kick against the, oh no, he doesn't kick against the pricks, does he? He kicks against the, I don't know what, perhaps, but he does. He does kick against it. Yeah, I don't mind going if you want, if I can get it to work. I'm sure I can. Right, I'm going to show you all something. Oh, hang on, I shouldn't have done that. Sorry. Right, I'll go back.
Roger.
Share, I need share first. Share, my technicians, it's all right. Where's share? Oh, there it is. I do know.
Right now, there's your
house. I didn't hear that.
I want to do this first.
All right, we'll go back.
Right. Okay. I won't share. I'm going to show this first, if that's all right. I don't know.
I can speak. We should maybe do that as a Zoom call. Really freak people out and pretend we're all in different houses, but then appear in each other's kind of screen.
Right, okay. I'll share it in a minute. Right, I wanted to show you that, which is a little Rodin. I'm going to do it as a document in a minute, but I wanted to show you this first because Roger gave me this at Christmas, because he knows how deeply I'm suffering from the lack of life drawing. I think, because normally I do life drawing every week and have done for a long time with Graham Beck, if anybody knows him, and before that with the college, and I route them out wherever they are life drawing. So I use this as my object because it kind of represents the thing that I'm missing most in lockdown, and that it's not the first time I've had to miss it. So I'll do my little talk now. Share screen again, here we go. And then share that, do I?
Click on your,
That, on that,
click on that now.
share, okay. Oh, I'm there,
Right,
thank you.
we'll make it a bit smaller so you can see it.
Oh, yes, because the writing has gone behind. I won't remember what I've written. Oh,
Is that right?
yeah, I've got my glasses on, I can manage. Right. Okay. I've tried to keep an element of humour to this. In primary school, I had already developed an interest in storytelling, putting on plays in the playground, but also making a comic featuring my want-to-be friends by drawing them as a family of bears. I included myself as the naughty bear, often drinking from the teapot spout, as I recall. Was I an anarchist in the making? This comic succeeded in ingratiating me with the more influential girls in my class. I realised drawing was a very serviceable tool with which to gain power and influence people. I had received quite a bit of praise for my skills as an infant, and on one occasion for a portrait of my friend on a blackboard in the conservatory. My mother sold flowers from the garden in there, and her customers were quite impressed with my drawing. And this is preschool almost, and said so. My brother, who's 7 years older than me, got very fed up with this and got a wet cloth and wiped it out, rather cruelly, which is the problem with a blackboard. Blackboards aren't. Anyway, after a stint at private school of dance and drama in Coventry, which is another story why my parents sent me there, probably because I was naughty, which I mostly remember for enjoying mime classes. And after GCSE, I was allowed to go to art college in Nuneaton. This is what I wanted, and I was so excited when yet again I was praised for my drawing skills from tutors at the college. Unfortunately, they also told me I could be successful at earning a living as an illustration or botanical drawing, which I admit I did enjoy, having spent a great deal of time in my parents' garden sketching. During lockdown, with no life classes, I resorted to the garden again. A couple of examples. I did a lot of things for Anna Bean in the garden, drew the cats, you name it, but no life drawing. However, the moment when it all made sense was when I entered the life room taught by a tutor who was an artist. I was hooked on figurative art. Having taken dancing lessons for years, body language had always fascinated me, and the luxury of a nude model was literally mind-blowing. Discovering new ways of drawing using things like negative space got me thinking. I realized, perhaps not for the first time, that art for me was not about illustration, but about illustrating ideas. There's just an example of some of my life drawings. I had been fortunate that my sister was nursing in London, and she took me on trips to the National Gallery, buying me books about art and dance, taking me to the theatre and films, showing me a life that widened my experience. She's 11 years older than me, and she literally was like a second mother. My mother was too busy in the garden. After she was married, she moved to Cambridge and then had me come and stay, taking me to the Fitzwilliam Museum. I was literally overwhelmed with how being creative was the life I wanted. So far, so good. But of course, there was a lot of talk about earning your living. And I suspect when I chose fine art to specialize in, my parents were confused and a bit puzzled, possibly even upset but they took me to interviews in far-flung places, including St Martin's in London, where at 17 I was told they only accepted girls on fine art courses to make good wives for the male artists. I was so intimidated, I did not answer back, which I should have done. Even on the foundation course, many of the staff had me pigeonholed as someone who should do illustration. However, the encouragement I received, and I still remember his name, Dave Berryhart, the life drawing and painting tutor, had allowed me to see a very different future for myself. And that's a picture I found. No, Greta Garbo, no. I'm not doing what you all want me to do. On arriving at art college to begin my DIP-AD in fine art, I was very disappointed to discover life drawing was on the way out, and little or no provision had been made for it. Conceptual art was what was being encouraged to think about. I did think about it, but the history of art module sparked my belief that there was an ever-changing landscape in art and room for whatever I chose to do. Without a life model, I looked to my own body for inspiration. I took photographs, made films, wrapped myself up in bandages, projecting slides on myself, on my enveloped body, and eventually made a fiberglass cast of myself too, to project onto as well. I had happenings that were kind of parties in my then flat, and I went on to build an inside-out room in a small outdoor area of the college. Secretly, I still did some life drawing and drew people in cafes. These and the fantasy drawings of domestic image ever showed the staff. And now we get to the bit that we were talking about a little bit. The Awakening Conscience by Holman Hunt. And I think everybody knows what's going on here, so I don't need to explain. I think, is it her conscience awakening? I think so, because he doesn't look like he's got too much of a conscience. Anyway, by now I was having tutorials where I was told I was mad and bad to know, which did not stop a variety of tutors trying to get me into bed. This was far from an uncommon experience for young women at art colleges or universities. Yet another obstacle to contend with, where you were made to feel that you were old-fashioned or a bit of a prude since the advent of the pill if you turn them down. By then, I was with a guy who fiberglassed a dead dog onto a swing and encouraged me to look at futurism for my dissertation instead of the pre-Raphaelites, the main choice of girls, I believe. That was quite the education, looking into Marinetti and the rise of fascism, and Alfred Jarry, the author of Père Ubu Plays. Fantastic. Sorry, I shouldn't do that, but I love doing futurism, but I was out of my depth when I did my dissertation, out of my depth completely. The struggle to continue making art after completing your diploma in art and design was initially quite hard unless you did the art teaching certificate. Eventually I did do it, but only after Roger doing his at London University. I moved to London with him and worked firstly in an antique shop in Burlington Arcade, followed by working on a travelling library across London, which was quite an experience. It allowed me to read and draw when I was on slow sites with few customers. Later, Roger and I moved to Kendal in the Lake District for him to teach and me yet again to work as a librarian. I also did a stint working as a petrol pump station where I recall reading Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which Dave mentioned last week, which caused this car salesman to tease me endlessly till I gave up reading it while I was at work. Bearing in mind there was no internet, it was hard to engage with art groups other than locally, but there was a good arts centre in Kendal, which is still there, called the Brewery, where I recall seeing art and plays, and so it wasn't a complete cultural desert. However, we tired of the countryside and I decided to do an art teaching certificate in Leeds. I taught in Chapeltown and then went to Tadcaster Grammar School for teaching practice. By now, Roger was back in Hull teaching, and we saw one another at weekends. He did not like teaching, and neither did I. But there it is, the eternal question, how to earn a living as an artist. Shortly after this, we married and had 4 children, and I began working in a nursery and then primary schools, designing projects for children. And there's the rub, training your creativity to enable others. I returned to art college for the second time post-children after being very ill, which turned out to be oddly beneficial. I knew my skills were a bit outdated, but I made the decision this time I would only draw and paint, irrespective of what was fashionable. Of course, I got distracted and did all sorts of other stuff, but I was reacquainted with my beloved life drawing. And that on the right-hand side is one of the things I got distracted by, making mannequins and dressing up as mermaids. Developed a taste for exhibiting again. Unfortunately, this time I had a studio courtesy of a European grant. That's all gone. In the old town, and I managed to get various commissions through groups I was associated with and opportunities to exhibit, run workshops, one in the Ferens, others in school, and the work I produced began to be recognised, and the encouragement I received made me confident in a way I had never been before. When I lost my studio space in the old town, I initially worked from home, but Roger saw I was struggling with this and suggested I apply to become part of Kingston Art Group. I took my work along and got a text from John Keane saying, "Bad news, we want you." I'm still part of Kingston Art Group with a studio in the Old Avenues Centre. Prior to that, I'd been in Barmston Street and Humber Street, where I was above the gallery we had there. I exhibited alone in an exhibition called Echoes, then with Roger, Chloe and Owen in Family Matters, and the combined CAG exhibitions in our gallery. During City of Culture, I proposed an exhibition for women of CAG called The Female Gaze, and with my daughter Chloe's help, got it accepted and funded. My figurative work has led me on a journey where, whilst I still paint and draw, I have turned to embroidery as an art form, again appropriating old masters and executing them as stitchwork alongside my paintings. It began with the Bayeux tapestry, substituting male knights for female warriors, inspired by Chloe introducing me to the work of many female artists who work in a variety of media, the likes of Louise Bourgeois, Paula Rego, Casca Colwitz, Frida Kahlo, Tracy Emin, Cora Walker, and endless others. The Female Gaze had made me research the work of female artists and their struggles, and boy, did they have some. A book that inspired me, lent by a friend after I began sewing work, was called The Subversive Stitch, which I've got here actually, by Rosika Parker, and I recommend it. And there's Louise Bourgeois, Cass Colwitz, which makes me cry, and Frida Kahlo. My sister claims my mother must be turning in her grave at the thought of me exploiting sewing for my art, when she never thought much of my sewing prowess, another obstacle. The drawing Marion used of Andromeda and Perseus to introduce this week's Ponderings on Obstacles, I emailed to my brother as a birthday card, and his remark made me think there are still problems out there. He said, "Why do you persist in drawing people in the buff? I don't think Mum and Dad would approve." He thought this was very funny, but it reminded me that women in art have a long way to go with some parts of the population. It seems appropriate to end with my Narcissus painting because artists are vain about their work and I think very vulnerable to criticism, which can often be the ultimate obstacle. I've only touched on personal obstacles, but I did do a small project on life drawing and found 2 articles. One article referring to an advertisement for a nude model through a job centre, which was banned. The other, an article about Paris life models who made a nude protest by taking to the streets to demand a pay increase. there had been a tradition where the cornet, a piece of art paper rolled into a cone, was passed round for tips as a model gets dressed after class. With no fixed contracts and an absolute minimum wage, it was and still is difficult to find models willing to pose. The misconception that there is no skill related to life modelling is common, but in France, it is considered a serious career choice. Interestingly, many models have gone on to become artists themselves, having developed the love of drawing and painting. And there's the Narcissus. There's how my embroidery started compared to how it is now, where it's got so complicated it takes me forever. That's the Bayeux tapestry, and I'm done. Right. Back. Stop sharing. Oh, and that's how complicated my embroidery's got now. It started off in lines and now it's taking me forever. Okay, done.
Thanks, Julia.
That's great, thank you. Excellent.
Yeah,
There were quite a few obstacles you mentioned, isn't it? It's kind of a whole journey. So any thoughts by anybody? Any questions? Any contributions?
I think it's interesting, Julia, with the tapestry. They've got a very fluent line, almost a line that's been drawn very quickly. You transcribe that onto cloth, onto the material. But then I suppose the needlework takes, I imagine, a lot slower process. So you're taking a very quick, fluent line and infilling it with, I guess.
It's more like tapestry, and it takes getting in the zone. I have to get in the zone, but it is like painting in silks. And at the moment, what I'm doing is I'm painting the same image, more or less, in paint, and then doing it in embroidery and bringing the two together. But the one I work on the studio and the other I work on at home. So when they come together, it's kind of strange.
But surely a tapestry would take longer, would it? I mean, I don't really know, but I presume a tapestry would take longer to make.
It takes a long time, but you can take it everywhere with you. Well, I did take it everywhere with me when I could go anywhere. Now I can't go anywhere, so it's mostly sitting on the settee, but I can do it a lot. I'm getting a bit arthritic in my hands, like my mother, so it could come to an end.
I guess what interests me is if something's a lot slower, if the technique's a lot slower, you're considering the map making more in a way. Or does it work like that? I don't know. When you're painting, it's quite quick.
It becomes more abstract. I think it's affected my painting because Roger's just seen the painting at the studio that I'm doing that is equivalent to that, which I can't show you the painting, obviously, but he said, oh, that's, and it's become, well, I won't say cartoon-like, but it's become more abstract. And I think the embroidery is affecting my painting because it's sort of going back and forth, which is kind of an interesting thing. Yeah. But my sister insists my mother is laughing her head off because everything I ever made as a child, she would go, oh, God, can you not finish anything off? I did a talk in the Holy Trinity, and a crafty thing, and they all started turning it over and looking at the back. And the minute they started looking at the back of it, I was going, no, don't look at the back. But then I've become interested in the back now because I find the back really quite fascinatingly energetic. I don't know whether you can see that.
Bit too close to.
It's become strangely. The back has become quite sort of vibrant. And
yeah, they're nice, I think.
Yeah, but that's another thing. My mother, Roger's got his little man on his shoulder. I've got my mother sitting there going, no, don't cheat.
That's the thing I'm interested in. Can everybody hear me? I can see myself. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's the thing I'm interested in about this is the thing that we have on our backs, all of us, and what they all are, the different things they are. You know, I'm really, I've known Julie and Roger obviously for so long. We came to Hull very similar times, very sort of mid-70s, and it's been amazing to see how. I'm looking at both of them because obviously we've been involved as well, teaching together. Well, Roger worked with my husband, etc., etc. So we've had so many complicated lives together, and we've been through families and everything, obviously, because we're old now. I'm just so amazed that, particularly Julia and Roger, but both of them have absolutely presence about saying they're artists. I think that's fantastic because I have never had that ability to do that. So that big question at parties or at places wherever you were all your lives, what do you do? And it's that thing of, you know, there's so many answers to that, especially if your arts have been dissipated a lot over the years and you're not just one thing. And it's that thing of, I wrote so much about this for my own sake today, just because I've enjoyed doing it. But I'm not going to do all that today. I'm just going to. What I like to do is to briefly read out it's not a very long poem. It's just a poem about what obstacles have been in my life. It's just because that's how I'm more of a writer, sort of. That I'm not an artist as such, even though I sometimes do some drawing. Is that all right with you if I just did that?
Yeah, please go ahead, Caroline. That's brilliant.
Okay. If I can find it, here it is. I literally wrote it at 5 o'clock because I thought I've got all this stuff and there's no way I can do all this clever stuff. I used to do whiteboarder work, but I've lost all the skills and I can't do this online and I've got no one to help me. So I'd rather do this if I can. Anyway, here we go. Okay. The obstacles I think are ourselves about art. I think that's what are the biggest things. You can blame and use every excuse in the book about why maybe I don't make enough. What is it? And this is what I want to say. So this is just a few, okay? Obstacles. Oh, where did you train? Oh, textiles fashion. That figured. You're very colourful. Where are you from? Oh, a Surrey convent girl, eh? Oh, I've heard what they're like. What does your husband do? Oh, did he go to the Royal College? Oh. Why did you come to Hull? Oh, he followed you. Why did you come to Hull? Why did you do that? But you've had no official training. What does he do again? Oh, he hasn't a job yet. Oh, we don't give employment grants to anyone other than the head of the household. We literally don't have a form for that. That happened to me. I came to Hull as a key worker and they wouldn't give me a grant initially. I was the first woman in the country to get that on equal opportunities for my job. And then I used to have things said to me like, you're a bit too exotic for Hull, aren't you? Because these are by people I worked with. And then when I shifted and changed and left teaching quickly, I was far too young and far too selfish at the time. I then went into theatre and basically broke in myself. Just went for it and auditioned. I had things like, we really would like to give you the role, by the way. But by the way, what does your husband think of you going on tour? I had that a lot. On acting, but this is about the arts in general. I think this is a real obstacle for a lot of people and mine in specifically, because this is what I've had to do with being here all my life, really, since I came up together with Ed. On acting, so are you a professional? Oh, but you're not trained? Where did you gain your equity card? Oh, theatre and education. Oh, do you work with amateurs? Semi-professional then, semi-professional. Are they all professional? Are you all paid? Oh, you teach too. Ah. And then I've written some stuff which I'd really like to work on a lot better about pride, because pride has kept me back from doing a lot of work I could have done till the last few years, about the standards and the high bars that I would give for myself. And that's happened also, I think, for my husband too, interesting enough. Me every second, the pride. Me every minute when young, me every hour, every day, every week, month, year, decade. So many ideas, so many places, so many platforms, so many filters, so many detours, so many cul-de-sacs, so many excuses, so many chances, so many near misses, so many knockbacks, remakes, rethinks, retrains, realizations. So much resilience, so much pride still, pride and prejudice. So much resistance, so much comparing, so much judging, a lot of blaming, a lot of giving away. I agree with Julia there. You give away so much of your creativity. Sometimes it's too much. Much analysing, too much deconstructing than constructing. And the obstacles to saying that I am an artist, or I am a poet, or an actor, or a musician, is that thing in you that people think, so what have you done? Are you successful? What is success? All these things go round and round. It's the chimps on your back all the time. And as you get older, you realise, I'm so much better now than I was. I'll just jump into anything I feel I want to try and make. And I'll, you know, that thing of being frightened. As you get older, your pride gets less, I think. I'm talking about myself, I think. So it's the more you make, and the more you make, you weigh up the nature and nurture and the opportunities you've had and you could have done. This, should I, could I, hould, you know, all that stuff. Make stuff, show, tell and be damned. Don't go easily into the dark night. Imagine and make more sparks till the end, because art is for that alone, to make sparks in the night. There you go. And I just wanted to show you this, because this is our philosophy in our house, which our children have also got. I hope you can see it. It's a Bob and Roberta Smith. Can you see it?
Mm.
Yeah.
It's a card and you have to sign it on the front. And we have that up in our house because I think sometimes the pressure on you to make art, when especially if you've had all the opportunities, and, you know, I had some fantastic chances. I went to Goldsmiths and, you know, I had the most amazing start. Is so great that you just don't know where to, you know, it becomes too much. So we don't think we make art in this house. We just make things and do things. That's what I wanted to say. That's my take on it.
Brilliant, Caroline. Absolutely brilliant. I'm sure I can say for everybody that spoke straight to my heart, really. Amazing, you know. Yeah, so much I could say. Is anybody else wanting to say something to Caroline here?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, you're breaking up.
Recognise all that. I recognise all. It's taken us a bloody long time to get there.
Yeah, I think so.
It's taken us a very long time to get there.
Yeah, I don't know how many. I don't know whether this is a gender thing. You know, I didn't want to dwell on that too much because in my life I think I had every possible opportunity and chance. I do recognise everything that Julia said, going through art school, all those things. And of course, you saw that in what I wrote about the acting world. It's the same in all of the arts. I'm hoping it's getting better. It is getting better for women. But I don't think that, I think that's a blaming thing too, because I've made choices that I have to stand with, you know, and I think sometimes my daughter actually pulls me up on this if I sort of sometimes go, if I'd, and, you know, it doesn't matter, just make it. It doesn't matter what it is, just share it, show it. And that's what this is, that's why this is great, isn't it?
Yeah. It's actually, it's similar to what I was going to talk about. You know, it's all around perception as well and how people perceive you often. And, you know, those questions that you've just kind of listed that people come up with, kind of questioning all the time as to who you are, what you are and why you are and how that kind of impacts you is really, it's hard and interesting. But you just mentioned your daughter, obviously, who kind of, you know, seems to come across as well as a, you know, she's a great artist. And I wonder as well whether your journey kind of helped to influence her journey and whether, you know, that's kind of giving her a different confidence, because that's something that I strive for, because, you know, I come from a small village background. You know, there was never, I mean, the thought of artist, nobody's an artist in the village. You know, they, as Roger actually mentioned, it's something you do kind of when you've done all your proper work. But it is changing. Times are changing, isn't it? And I see the creativity in my daughters, and I really, really nourish and nurture that and make them proud of it and kind of value that so different. Yeah, so times are maybe changing. I wonder.
I hope so. I mean, my parents, my mother and father, encouraged me to go to not drama school. I should have. I mean, I could go on all about why I should have gone to drama school. I wished I had, and all those things. But it didn't happen for various reasons in our family. At the time, we had all sorts of bereavements and things, and so I went to art school. But they didn't ever ask me what I was doing. They were not the least bit interested. It's so fascinating to me because, they were glad for me to go, but I think there was an element there of, oh, well, she'll meet some nice people and she's very creative and she's very expressive. Because this was, my mother was a 50s housewife with 5 children at home. I do think that the nature and the background you come from, obviously, it obviously puts you on certain tracks, but then you make decisions, don't you? And then the choices you make, you must stand by them or leave them. There's no, nobody has forced me to. The choices I took that took me away from maybe what I could have done, should have done, could have done, would have done. I'm living them now. I'm still here, and it's like my daughter sometimes. I sometimes find she's a bit intolerant about that because she's young. As you get older, you get so much more thick-skinned about it, don't you? But it is very nice, and I'm sure if yourself or anyone else who has happened to have children who are in the arts, I've got a musician and an actor in my family, both of whom one of them luckily in New Zealand is leading a normal life, thank God for her. But of course my son, he's having a terrible time. His band's collapsed. He's, what can you do? And then sometimes, you can sit there and think, well, surely they could have made some money and made a life. But how could they have been? They come from our life, our nurture, our house with all the stuff that some people tell me, God, you've got such a mad, crazy, creative house. And to us, it's just our house because that's who we are. Mm. So they couldn't be anything else, could they really?
You mentioned, Marion, I don't want to keep on about it, but when I mentioned the female gaze, everybody, I'm wearing it. I had 100 of these T-shirts, merch as they call it. Anyway, working with Chloe on that was life-changing. Because we had meetings with all the women from CAG, and Chloe would pull me up, like you said, and make me think about something twice. Why are you saying that, Mum? And my prejudices fell away from me. The guilt, the prejudices, the things fell away from me because she helped me move on and realize, I don't need to.
I think if Marianne is younger than us. Sorry, Ju, but she is. And I'm thinking she'll have a younger daughter again, who will be yet again in a different way of thinking about themselves. Every decade shifts things, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
I think when we choose to join this sector, the arts sector or the creative arts, there's a realization that it's not going to be easy, that we're going to have to think alternatively, and think about alternate income streams, and so you're going to have that, and you're going to come up against obstacles all the time. I think we're all experiencing that. We've got to find an alternate way of making a living or surviving, really, and that we all find different ways of doing that. We all seem to survive until late adulthood in quite a successful way, and that's all part of the journey. But I think people often see an obstacle as like something they cannot get over, and it's quite normal that we'd all have emotions about any obstacle. I think just realizing those emotions, there is a normal reaction, and it's what you do, how you use that emotion, to go forward or go around or avoid or think alternately. So it's just recognizing that, really. Recognize that we are going to face obstacles. We've chosen that life, and just learn to kind of deal with it in a way, or manage it, I guess. We all have to do that.
Yeah. One thing I hate at the moment is there's a massive sort of movement at the moment about follow your dreams. If you just dream it, it'll happen. Do you know what? I really hate that whole thing, because you can end up being so driven and so constantly thwarted and so constantly like having to remake a remake. I did that for too long myself, I think. And I can see it in other people, and there just seems to be so much of it about, doesn't there? All the television programs, you know, about I just had this dream and I had to go for it. And there's just so much of it everywhere.
But I think, Caroline, the cult of celebrity has been a huge problem, but it's always been there, and there's always been people who are famous and doing. But if you really want to do something, I don't entirely agree with you about not going for your dream, because I waited so long to go for my dream, and now I don't give a flying whatever what anybody thinks about what I'm doing, really. But I did for most of my life, and I'm worried about, you know, whether, you know, where you should put your priorities. But I don't care anymore. I just do it. And if it all goes in a skip, I don't care. I've enjoyed making it all.
Okay, I'm again aware of time, so we are really, really terrible in this group. Might be another part.
Sorry, Marianne, you didn't actually do yours. You haven't done yours, Marianne, because I cut in, didn't I?
Yeah, it's very, very short actually, and it's similar to yours. It's just words. I was looking for pictures, but I haven't got any pictures. So if you don't mind, I'm going to pick somebody else before me, because I feel like...
No, I just didn't want...
Mine isn't that interesting. Jill, do you want to go? Yeah?
I'll go, just because I'm scared my son will come in the middle of it. I don't want him to hear it.
Excellent, good.
That's a good
reason. Oh, hang on.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so mine starts off quite general, the first couple of slides, because I think I was scared to get personal, but it does become personal after a couple of slides, so I'm not avoiding it altogether. So I started off with where I ended last week, really, with Mona Hartoum, really as the artwork that represents overcoming obstacles in your life, moving forward despite the things that hold you back. But with the sense that those personal demons are somewhere, as we've described a few times, on your shoulders, sometimes closer, sometimes further away. So that's where I was last week. And then the other image I've put in is Richard Serra's Tilted Arc, which is literally an obstacle across a town square, which literally got in the way of people crossing that space. It was installed in 1981 and eventually taken down and destroyed in 1989. And I think it was an opportunity for people to think about those things that got in their way in their life. So two kind of art history responses to obstacles. Then I've got a bit passionate, I'm afraid. So obstacles to art making art can be personal. We'll probably look at these. Different people will look at different things: personal, economic, social, institutional. People are excluded because of their gender, because of disability, because of race. And some of the art that I like the most from the 19th, some a little bit from the 19th, but definitely the 20th and the 21st century, has been art that is about including everyone and everyone having an opportunity to participate, and moving away those kind of obstacles based on, you know, particularly on class and gender. So they've been about removing obstacles, which is quite right, should be done. And so I'm interested in art that's in non-typical places by non-typical people for non-typical audiences using non-typical materials. I can't read the next bit because we're in the way. With non-typical expectations and assumptions, and that I think is our human right. And I won't read the quotes, but I've got two old favourite quotes. I'll see if I can move us actually. The little pictures are in the way. Never mind. I've got two favourite quotes that I use quite a lot in my own writing. One's by Matarazzo, which talks about everyone has the human right to be involved in culture, to make representations and to make representations of their own lives and to enjoy that within their communities. And the other one is from David Harvey, who talks about the right to the city, that we all have a right to change ourselves by changing our city. And he talks about that as being one of our most precious yet most neglected human rights. And I love those two ideas together. Everyone's got a right to be involved in culture. Culture is our common property. It belongs to all of us, and we've all got a right to be part of our cities and communities and to change those. So I like those two ideas, and I put them closely together. So to illustrate that, there's another Bob and Roberta. Just a letter to Michael Gove. So art isn't a barrier to learning or to work or to life. So it shouldn't be removed. It should be there. It's the gateway to those things, not the barrier to those things. Okay, but in the spirit of today's task or theme that we were set, I will go into some more personal obstacles. But for each of my obstacles, I've done a bit like, I guess, Caroline and Julia, we're kind of similar age. I've done a bit the same, looked at obstacles, at different points in my life. But I've looked at each of them as a positive and a negative. So an obstacle that was perhaps almost an opportunity in some ways. So on the left is the little council house that I grew up in. It has changed. This is how it is now. It was different, slightly different when I grew up in it. And this is a return visit a couple of years ago where I made my husband go back and look at it. So conceivably, my early life was a bit of an obstacle. I grew up in the council house, fair degree of poverty, very fragile parents, bless them, broken home, which in those days there was a fair stigma against, and I was actually judged or labelled as, oh, you've come from a broken home, therefore you're this, that and the other. So it had a kind of label attached to it. So that was a bit of an obstacle, but on the other hand, it was a bit of an opportunity because of that, all those kind of restrictions of who I should be, because I was this sort of person. I had free school dinners, I had free school uniform, because I was that sort of person, it seemed to bring all sorts of things with it. But my escape from that was the art room. And you know that I've talked about these images before. As a result of those sort of restrictions, I loved the space of the art room. I loved the spaciousness of art. I loved it when the art teacher said, you can go anywhere in the school and find things and draw them or make things out of them. I loved the audacity of the ideas that I came across. So potentially having all those restrictions made me seek space, and I found space in art. It also potentially always positioned me thinking I was a bit on the outside, a bit on the margins, a bit on the edge of things, not quite in the mainstream, although that's not been true for quite a lot of my life, but it maybe made me think that maybe that's the thing that was on my back, and that's influenced me. So I went to art college. So my mum, bless her, very behind that. She didn't ever say you couldn't do that. So I went off to art college. This is Exeter Art College. And I've talked about some of this in the past. But in keeping with what Julia said, there's no hiding. It was an outrageous place in some ways. It was hugely sexist. There's no other way of talking about it, and very hard drinking. And in its way, actually, as hierarchical as anything, really. So, for example, abstract painting was far more worthy than landscape painting. Yeah. Abstract painters were far more charged with integrity than figurative painters. It was very rules bound, even for all its freedom. It wasn't a bad place to be, and I was really pleased that I went, but I've got to own up to some of those things. It was very much based on the hard drinking school of abstract expressionism. That's what it modelled itself on. So there's absolutely no way that you could get a first if you were a woman. We were all better known by our boyfriends than by ourselves. And just as someone else described the other week, I think they did employ that kind of amateur psychology of, if you tear it up and trash it up, then that's somehow good for you. You know, if staff tear your work up in front of you, that somehow does you the world of good. Well, it doesn't, and I would never dream of doing that to anyone that I taught. So there were some negatives there, but there were some great positives, one of which was my art history teacher, Leslie Kerman, who herself would say she'd never have got studio teaching. She could only get kind of art history teaching. She still influences me today, like all her ideas about Duchamp and pictorial space and chance and all sorts of beautiful, lovely, spacious ideas still live on with me. And I've got a great ongoing relationship with her, which I absolutely love. So there was big pluses that came out of that, plus a great network of friends, two of whom, when we did Fountain during City of Culture, two of my friends from Cornwall came up and looked after me for a week, cooked me meals, came and swept up and just generally supported me, which was just amazing. So there were a huge number of positives. So I don't dismiss the universal and abstract principles of modernism that I learned at art college. I'm surprised I fell for them, because I was always a very political like to think I was quite a political person. So I was glad to reunite the personal, the political and the visual and aesthetic. I was glad that those could come back together again, because they've been a bit separated at art school. When I started doing art history with the Open University, and that was like late 80s, early 90s, I did some just amazing art history courses that turned all those ideas that I'd learned at art college, which were actually a bit old-fashioned, on their head, and really brought in stuff to do with gender and race and class, and was absolutely fantastic. Those courses had some of the best thinkers and teachers. That was a really heyday for art history at the Open University. So I never regretted art school. I loved it, and I'm so glad I went, but it left me needing something else, and I did find that in these courses. The next slide was the biggest obstacle in my life, which I actually can't really talk about, because it involves somebody who I don't know, potentially might be known by people in the group, but also would be known by people in my family. So I can't necessarily talk about it, but it was a difficult time. It was a difficult relationship thing. And I've represented that with Temenos, because what it shows was the idea of having your own perspective and your own reality and your own solid ground taken from underneath your feet. So I represented it abstractly rather than going into any particular details. Oh, that came too quickly. So that was a negative. That was a big obstacle, probably my biggest obstacle in my life. But the positive from it was teaching at the art school at that time, not this time, the time of this image, but much earlier, where I found colleagues and you know, really supported me through it. And the thing that I did discover was that I could teach whatever was happening outside. I could carry on teaching, and that teaching was my solid ground. So I you know, real sort of positives came out of that difficult obstacle. And probably my final obstacle was maybe 15 years or so later, at the end of my teaching career at Hull College, which again probably didn't truthfully knock me for 6, because a lot of my creativity had been tied up with working with students and teaching, and I found it quite hard to move away from that and to step outside of that. But the positive from that is, although it was quite a big obstacle for me, is that I now find myself no respecter of hierarchies, institutions or organisations. I've been a teacher for 40 years and very quite respecting of all of that. I suddenly found myself no respecter of institutions, organisations. And what I love now is the informal and random network of artists and writers and people that develop around practice and shared interest, just like this group, like that. I love these networks of people that you wouldn't meet normally and that you wouldn't find in the normal run of things, except that you share this interest, this visual world, or these ideas in common. So I'm loving those more organic networks. And so I think I am beginning to find my creativity outside of teaching and outside of institutional structures. So those were my obstacles, and as I say, I tried to like think about them positively and negatively. And then there was one more that occurred to me as someone else was talking, and that's our own obstacle that we put in front of us of failure. So the spectre of failure is sometimes our own obstacle. I think somebody sort of touched on that. And I've got a really lovely bit that's just planned for the conclusion of my PhD, which is about the positives of failure. So I might share that with you or share it somewhere another time, but the fear of failure is an obstacle that we all make for ourselves, which is unnecessary, because failure can be like a really good success. And that's done.
Great.
Thank you, everybody.
That's great. Can I say something about failure? It's Karen. Can anybody see? Yeah. As a drama tutor for years, that's one of the biggest things about that so many young people that I worked with were so scared of exploring and experimenting, because our education system is so poorly set up for that to happen. But it's only through exploring, experiment and failing, as Beckett said, do it again, fail better, that's how you find out. It's how you develop and change and become something, isn't it? So that's really hit me, Jill, you said that, because that's the thing. I think the fear of failure is what stops most people, isn't it?
Yeah, and I haven't got it to hand, but I've got a really lovely passage of writing about failure, which is really powerful. I've got it planned, as I say, for my conclusions. I'll share it sometime.
Great.
Yeah, it is really good. So, yeah.
You know, when I went to Denmark and went to a school there, and they called it the third space, where it was literally students were invited to just experiment and to fail, and they called it a third space, where there was just kind of invited and, to take away that fear, because it was almost expected that you're going to fail.
Yeah.
It always, I think it's such a brilliant idea, because out of failure can come sometimes the best things, really, isn't it? And learning, it's about...
It's only practice, isn't it? It's practice. It's exploring. And children play through exploring. I mean, they only find out how to do anything by exploring and touching and tasting and everything, don't they? It's what we don't do in our schools. It's appalling. I think it's terrible. Everything's right or wrong. And in my view, there's very little that's right or wrong.
It did change briefly. Only now we seem to be going back to it again. There was a tremendous amount of enthusiasm for letting children play. And having worked in nurseries and primary schools, where I would deliberately not draw things right if I was explaining something to children, I'd go, I don't know how many legs a frog's got or something like that. So that the children would feel empowered. And they've taken that away from them. And I feel in this pandemic, it's going to be even worse afterwards, because, because there's so much pressure on the 3 R's and not on the creative, and I feel very anxious about how things might go with young children again, because it is about, it's empowering them by praise, not by constant, because we grew up in that, didn't we? I mean, we grew up in a generation where you were wrong. If you were wrong, you were wrong, or you were right, you were right, and that there was no in between. And it was rote learning, and if you didn't, and I don't know, it didn't suit me. I don't think it suited many, really, but
I think fear of failure starts very young as well. I mean, to be personal, I failed my 11 plus, and that completely wiped me out for about 6 months. I was so stunned and shocked because that was not expected of me. That it took me ages. It's still quite a little scar there somewhere that I failed my 11 plus, because that's how it was seen in those days. If you failed your 11 plus, you were then like inferior. That's why I've always hated exams, even though I've taught them a long time over my life. But yeah, I don't teach for exams. I teach because I taught because I love the subject and I wanted to do that. And exams hopefully would just they would get them. But you know, nowadays it's teaching to exams, isn't it? Anyway, that's another issue really. But yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Jill. So lovely, and I do like the artworks that you kind of present, and the quotes. It's always a revelation and an insight. Lovely, really, really nicely done. And now I'm thinking, so we've got about 15 minutes. We could kind of definitely have somebody else. We could kind of overrun, or we could do some other people next week.
I think the subject is so big. I think it really needs to go over to another week. I think, doesn't it, really, to give everybody a chance to.
That's what I think. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's correct. And I'm looking at. So we're still here from Lisa, from Graham, from Sarah, and from David. And I'm thinking, because I know I'm quite short, so maybe if I just kind of conclude today's, and then is that okay with David, Graham, Lisa, and Sarah? Would that be okay? We'll kind of have you next week, and Madeleine as well, if you're interested and kind of feel free. You've seen the format now. Everybody's welcome to do that. So, so mine's just a little reflection really, and it's actually something I was glad that we touched upon that, and I think that's why I was happy to jump on that, because I do think about that a lot. And for me, actually, having heard what you all say now, and especially Caroline, and I think I still wouldn't call myself anything kind of related to the arts. It's kind of still something that's somewhere that I don't really belong to. I don't really reach really. So I thought about it, and I think one big obstacle very early on for me was, it's perception. It's how other people actually perceive you and make a judgment based on where you come from or who they think you are. And for me, so in Germany, aged 11, you enter secondary school. And so in my case, that meant leaving the village and every day getting a bus to the nearest town and going to school there. And I don't know whether you know, but in Germany, we've got a tier system. So I went to the highest tier, which kind of is supposed to be, I guess it's similar to the 11 plus that you had. So if you kind of have certain grades, you go to that school. But it's based on achievement. So the school was full of people from different backgrounds, kind of very academic backgrounds to kind of, people like me from a small village. So, but having grown up in the village and, not having kind of really explored much beyond, it's the first time I really encountered the wider world and different backgrounds. And I got along really well with everyone. But I also all of a sudden became aware that I, for example, spoke with a really heavy dialect with, beforehand, everybody spoke the same dialect. So I never really noticed that as much. And I also became aware that, that there are a lot more finer nuanced things in life, and that there are people out there who are incredibly articulate, confident, and knowledgeable already aged 11. So it was okay. I was really curious and eager to learn and throw myself into it. And I did really well in all the subjects, apart from the creative subjects. And it was odd because I was really interested, but I loved art lessons, the smells, the physical aspect, everything. And I remember when the art teacher showed a film of just a road trip overlaid with music. Most kids were bored, but I really loved it. I kind of felt like I totally got what it was all about. And I loved learning about the artists, and I threw myself into it. But I kind of soon realized that the teacher just had made up his mind about who I was based on kind of, my background, how I spoke, how I probably articulated. And he just never, ever encouraged me. I think he just saw me as a simple, unrefined girl from the village who couldn't possibly understand any of the subtle nuanced elements of art. He had this real was a real arrogance that came across. And I remember one moment, the brief was to come up with a design for a house that had no corners, so just round curves. And I felt I came up with it. I still like it. I still have it at home, and I'm still proud of it. It kind of looked like a flower and had all these rooms and a beautiful entrance, and literally there was no straight line or corner. Well, angular corner. There were obviously other corners. And he just kind of tore it to bits. Whereas his favorite, I thought, his house wasn't half as imaginative, but he got praised. So it just kind of really, didn't give me the confidence to believe in myself. I never ever encountered in any of that first part any encouragement to kind of do that or pursue that. So, and I might just imagine it that it was perception, but it's just kind of something I couldn't explain it any differently, why he would kind of not be encouraging. So that first experience, it was just kind of something that made me feel, this wasn't for me, I wasn't the right person for that. It's kind of for a certain type of person, for a certain type of people. And it was similar with actually in kind of creative writing, drama. They were all on such a high horse, it felt, kind of, So it just, that was kind of my first obstacle. I kind of, then the journey continued, and you kind of don't give up, and you find different people and different places. But I think it's always still something there as well for me, that kind of, do I really belong? Is there kind of some barrier, or do you have to be a certain type to be accepted? So I think it's about perception, and it kind of plays down, even what Julia and what Jill was saying about art school, and kind of, this is the cool art, this is the right thing, this is what you should do to kind of be a good artist. And it's kind of, I don't know, there's so much perception rather than actually, and I think it is changing. It's encouraging individual creativity. And again, what you said, the art that you like at the moment, it's that inclusivity, and it's for everybody to go inside and look what art is inside, rather than having kind of this high brow perception. And I know we spoke about it last week, didn't we, about, or was it Roger, about that exhibition in kind of Tate Britain, isn't it, that kind of broke the mold, and all of a sudden there were other people in the exhibition, and the critique didn't like that, didn't it, when kind of young people kind of not dressed properly went into that. So so I think a really huge obstacle is perception, and so that's kind of it, really. Thank you.
I think it illustrates. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think kind of illustrates. We often champion the, I guess, the way good teachers have kind of really inspired us, to go on and keep going with something, kind of really get involved in it. But that's a great, that's the other side of it. That's a negative example of where, just a badly chosen remark or a kind of negative comment about a piece of work can stay with somebody for their whole lifetime, really, can, impact upon them into adulthood and beyond. And so it just shows the power that, those kind of comments, or, positive comments and negative comments can have on somebody's, nurturing, while they're going through a, nurturing period. So it's quite a powerful thing that those comments have stuck with you, for this long.
Yeah. Smell his coffee breath, really.
Quite early on, I realised that people had a vested interest in keeping you in your place. Just about everybody, at some points in my life, seemed like they had a vested interest. And I don't know whether I was just born with a contrary personality, but I would seem to end up in trouble, but nevertheless, I didn't regret it, and I still don't. I still feel, I ran away from school when I failed an arts class because I thought they were wrong. I stood up and I'm not suggesting this is something I should be proud of, but now I am glad, because I was always in trouble. In church, I stood up and told everybody they were a bunch of Pharisees, because I got parasites and Pharisees muddled up. So I put them together and called them "You bunch of Pharisees." That was in what we call Sunday school, and walked out. And my mother didn't discover for quite a long time that I was just going to the playground every Sunday.
Do you know, Julia, sorry to interrupt, my mum used to try and take me to Anglican church every Sunday, and I absolutely hated going and hid we lived on a farm, and I hid all over the farm in loads of different buildings, and she could never, I worked out what time we were going to go and then hid, and she always used to try and come and find me to take me, and my brother used to get out of going, and I used to get really annoyed that he didn't have to go, but I sort of had to go with her. And when I went, I used to fall asleep because I was so bored and so sort of not interested at all. I just used to completely fall asleep, and I remember the choir laughing at me, you know, like thinking it was really funny that I always used to fall asleep, and I absolutely hated going. But it's really interesting because my brother was christened and I wasn't christened. And it was just because they, you know, it was the second child and they sort of didn't get round to it, no particular reason. And I always sort of felt like there was, you know, like, I don't know, it was always made me feel sort of different because I wasn't christened. And I just don't know, it's interesting, isn't it? I just didn't enjoy going at all. Used to hate going.
It's just a creative thinking type, something. It's just we are. I know, as a stereotype in my family, I was the creative, awkward, temperamental one, and I was one of 5. And I think you get stereotyped quite early in that thing. Also, the other thing that I was thinking when Jill and everybody has shared is that you can't really. I remember that thing of abstract expressionism in the art. You know, I was at Goldsmiths. You know, if you try to do anything figurative, and obviously I was working in textiles and I was doing some very odd textiles because it wasn't like the textiles they were expecting me to do. But if you didn't do abstract or you tried to do something figurative, you know, the abstract expressionists were absolutely the hierarchy. It's very difficult. It's an era. You can't really ever escape the era you're in. I find that interesting too, because things go in fashions and waves, and if you only have to look at your art history to see that. And all different artists who emerge from all the different arts. It's hard to go against the grain, isn't it? If you're somewhere where the spirit of the age is, that's the thing, this is the golden, you know, triangle at the moment. It's very, very hard to do that, to go against it. And not everybody does it, and so therefore people try to fit into those things too. Because I'm at art school, therefore this must be the thing, you know.
So something that annoys me is that people assume you only like the kind of work you do yourself.
Yeah, that's true.
That is so wrong, because I could even appreciate, what was I talking about, Roger, that when we arrived, they were doing, what was it called? You know, Dave, Harold Hurrell.
Conceptualism.
Conceptualism. I could understand conceptualism. I was perfectly, it just didn't rock my boat. And I think that's the point, isn't it? Everybody, and as soon as you put strictures around what you're allowed to do, then, I mean, I've always found the edge of a canvas really annoying. I want to make another piece and another piece and have triptychs and diptychs and things like that, because I've never liked the edge of things. And I think that's the problem, compartmentalizing art and saying this is what, and you're right about fashion, because it's fashionable, you know, whatever. And I think art is such a huge body of types of things and work, and I'm always absolutely enthralled by new things that people do and feel.
The older I get, the more I think it is all so connected, and there's no such thing as a hierarchy of it. That's the thing I'm most amazed that I didn't realise when I was younger, that there isn't a hierarchy, you know. This is what I was sort of mentioning last week, really. to me, that no person's an island. That arts is connected to something else. I used to say that when I was a really bad art teacher a long time ago. I used to sometimes say to kids, think of anything in this room that hasn't been designed by an artist. That's a design, you know, and they try and catch me out, you know, just to try to give them a sense of how valuable the arts were, if you like, or art was, because I was an art teacher at that time. I remember they often used to try and trick me and maybe mention something that wasn't, well, that's not art, is it? Yes, it is, because someone designed that for you and put it in a packet and, you know, all that stuff. It's all connected, isn't it?
The only thing I would say is something Roger said the other night, didn't you? I meddle with cars, he said, but I'm not a mechanic. And my daughter will say this too. There is a fashion for saying everybody's an artist. Anybody can be an artist. Well, anybody could be an artist, but I don't think everybody is. And I don't think, I don't accept that, you know, it's not a huge skill to be able to think about ideas and it's hard work. People have this idea that art is, oh, aren't you lucky to be able to do that? And it makes me go, spare. And Roger said it the other night when he said that, because that's how I feel. It makes me quite cross for the people who've put in the effort in whatever media or genre they've chosen to really explore it, and then somebody just come along and say, aren't you lucky? Oh, God gave you a gift. And I can't repeat even now what I...
Okay, Sarah.
Well, one of the nice...
That's sort of makes me think, I have got loads of things, but I'll save those for next week. But what you're saying there, Julia, just reminds me of what we said in the last session that brought us to this session, which was about us all doing the textiles and how we knew we all wanted to do art, and people told us to do other subjects like textiles, because ultimately I thought, in a sense, I'd grow out of wanting to do art. I thought it was something that I would do it and then I'd go through a process and then I'd probably somehow change my mind or something, or get a proper job or something, you know, but it's still there. All those things I never actually did go to, like, it's that, you know, you want to go to the Royal College of Art, you think that's what you know, and I haven't done that. You think that that's what you should have done, and you don't lose it. You don't lose wanting to do art. It just stays with you, doesn't it? You just carry on just the same.
It will out in whatever it comes out in.
Definitely. Excellent. I think that was a great, actually, kind of closing statement almost, Sarah. I really like that. It is true, isn't it? It doesn't go away, and we do overcome all the obstacles because we're all here, we're all talking about it, and it's been a really, really amazing insight into the different obstacles, and kind of to see the synergies as well, and, you know, the similarities, and yeah, to kind of bring it out into the open. And I really, you know, a huge thank you to all of you for having shared that and been so open and been so creative in the way you've all presented it differently. So it's been great. Thank you so much. And, you know, I'm glad we allowed this to kind of run over and expand, and I really look forward to kind of hearing from Lisa, Sarah, Graham and David next time, and maybe Madeleine, maybe, and anybody else who might want to join. So obviously this is you know, an open group, and if you find somebody who you think could benefit from joining this conversation, you know, please bring them along. I mean, Caroline, you've joined recently and it's been a great addition to have you on board. So again, thank you. And maybe we get Michelle properly on as well, actually. Look, Michelle is still here. She's been... I just want to... Yeah, hopefully we'll get you on another time properly onto the Zoom call as well. So, okay. It's dinner time.
Well done to everybody that did manage to share that as well, because those things are quite personal, aren't they? Talking about obstacles.
And I say shame on Marianne's art teacher for not seeing her, what was in her heart. Shame on you.
Next time I'm back in Germany, I'll take a picture of my design, and then you can tell me, well, actually, Marianne, it's really shit. So, you know, you was right.
Build it.
Okay, thank you. you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Sweet.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, David.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.